Well, welcome back. So, what were some of your answers? No, I can't hear you. I'm sorry, but I'm sure that a bunch of your answers had to do with knowledge. And knowledge is an important part of wisdom, knowing some stuff. But also, as we all know, there's a lot of stuff that you can know and still not be wise, right? You can have a lot of knowledge but not know how to use it. There's something about wisdom that's about like knowing how to use the knowledge that you have, a wise use of a skill or something like that. But also we can say wisdom would also just be kind of knowing how to do something. Maybe you can know a lot about cooking, but wisdom is like if you actually know how to do it. When you get in the kitchen, if you're missing one ingredient, you can just immediately substitute for another. You know what's going to end up tasting good. You know what most people are going to like, how much salt you have to put on it for the majority of people to like it, right? It's kind of this acquired knowledge that has a lot of practical elements to it, that allows you to change in the middle, or make improvisations and things like that. That's probably something that people mentioned. We would also say maybe wisdom is something kind of broader and bigger too, something about like the cosmos itself. So whatever your answer for wisdom was, we're going to take a little look at a few different sources for wisdom and other kind of ways that ancient Near Easterners understood that wisdom worked. Well, one thing ancient Near Easterners think when they think about wisdom, across from Egypt all the way to Mesopotamia and all the way to Persia, and including Israel, is they think about practical know-how, just how to do stuff. So it's not even just the knowledge of it, but it's like really knowing how to actually complete a task in real time. So here we see an Egyptian image. This is a painting, a fresco on a tomb from Luxor. And here we see these are craftspeople. These craftspeople are working and doing stuff, working with their hands and creating things. And so we see over here an artist who is sculpting a sphinx. This kind of practical know-how was really important for ancient societies like it is today. Well, maybe even perhaps like today, a lot of people who work with their hands are not considered, and were not in the ancient world considered very important. That is to say that craftspeople were not revered in the ancient world. Today, like if you have like a great painter, that great painter, if they make it become famous and so on, people get to know their names, and then they can maybe even sometimes parlay it into some money and some fame and recognition and so on. But that was just not the case in the ancient world. Many craftspeople were lower class. Their names were not important. They didn't sign their names on who sculpted the Sphinx. No one knows. Probably a lot of different people, all very skilled, very famous people, but ultimately unimportant to the people who ran society. Their skill was important, but their names were not. So this is kind of like a basic form of wisdom. You can see this in Proverbs too, just the fact of knowing how to do stuff. Part of Proverbs is like knowing where your knife and your fork go. Knowing how to live life and how to do certain things. There's a lot of agricultural knowledge in Proverbs, like how to plant stuff and how to grow stuff. There's even some kind of ancient wisdom that we might have in something called the Gezer calendar that tells us about when to plant and how long to wait for harvest and so on. All that practical stuff. That's a form of wisdom. There's another form of wisdom we can say that we can see throughout the ancient Near East, and that's a very different kind of wisdom. Not just knowing how to do stuff, but thinking and reflecting upon the order of the universe. And this is what I mentioned before, that sense of order, fundamental order. The basic idea here is that there is some kind of divine force. And right, so in the ancient world, everyone is polytheistic. There's lots of gods everywhere. But there's also the sense that kind of the order of the universe is itself a deity. And that it's possible for you to kind of come into contact with this deity whenever you discern the fundamental order of the universe. Almost like for scientists today, there's this idea, there's a grand unification theory out there. You can kind of figure out one equation for all of the universe, and figure out everything that would happen based on this one equation. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but this ancient principle of wisdom, we can call this maybe like wisdom in all caps. Wisdom all lowercase is just like how to do stuff. This is like all uppercase wisdom. Wisdom, the wisdom of the cosmos and the whole universe, and trying to find it. the quest of trying to find this universal order, that itself is wisdom too, right? Like that the path of trying to get there. And wherever you see the wisdom of the world in like little things, even like sculpting something or learning how to plant plants, like you're kind of seeing like a little reflection of this much bigger and much more mysterious order of the cosmos. So in ancient Israel, this would have been called Chokhmah. Chokhmah, if you learned that vocabulary word for in Sales grammar, you know it means wisdom. But also Chokhmah, it's a feminine noun. Chokhmah also just means wisdom itself, and sometimes you'll see it in Proverbs, say, with just a capital W, and it's woman wisdom. It's perceived to be this kind of independent character, like an angel almost. This divine being that was created by God in order to construct the universe and hold it together and so on. Of course, in Christian tradition, we link this to the idea of the Greek idea of the word or the logos, this kind of cosmic principle of unity, which draws from this ancient Near Eastern idea of the order, this kind of underlying rational order of the universe. And that, of course, in the Gospel of John, this is said to be Jesus. But so in ancient Egypt, they called this figure Ma'at. And here you can see these are three images of Ma'at. Ma'at was oftentimes pictured in this kind of like almost like a sleeping bag. This is just like a kind of cloth that would have been wrapped around, and this is a Ma'at here, and that's Ma'at next, and then it's also Ma'at at the end there. And Ma'at often is wearing a feather. And this feather is kind of like the lightness of the universe, and that's her kind of figure. And she's also got an Ankh cross on her knee in these two images here. The Ankh cross being the symbol of life, so that she is like kind of bringing the principle of life itself, and that she is a kind of tucked in all in herself, kind of just meditating and holding the universe together with her thoughts and her wisdom. And then also Ma'at was associated with the weighing of the heart ceremony, which I've got an image of in just a second. But so Ma'at was this Egyptian goddess of wisdom, order, justice. Here she is with her wings outspread. You ever read the Psalms and you hear stuff about how Yahweh has wings like under the shadow of your wing and things like this? This was just an ancient Near Eastern symbol that divine beings had wings. It was a symbol for talking about their ability to move around and their presence, but also their protection. Like just like a chicken would kind of protect her, or a hen would protect her young underneath her wings. The gods and goddesses would protect people underneath their wings. So here's Ma'at with her feather, kind of protecting the entire universe and guarding it and holding it together. And here is the weighing of the heart ceremony, this Egyptian, particularly Egyptian idea of the afterlife, which people in Mesopotamia and in Israel really didn't have, and in Canaan. But in Egypt, they had this idea that if you were an elite, if you were upper class, that there would be a weighing, like a testing ceremony after you died to see if you went into the beatific afterlife. And here is the heart being weighed right here. There's the heart of a person being weighed over, and remember, heart means a kind of your thoughts and some of your emotions. But really, so this is like this is you, like what you did or something like that with your life. And then on the other scale, you see Anubis, the jackal-headed god of Egypt, who is weighing a feather. And that feather is actually Ma'at, wisdom. Were you wise? Did you live your life according to wisdom, which also included kind of ethics, right? Were you good? Were you thoughtful for other people? And that really is the kind of weighing ceremony. If you're, if you in a way are lived your life according to Ma'at, it would balance out. And at the end there's Thoth, the ibis-headed god who is the scribe, and he's got a scribal palette there, and he's getting the ink on there, ready to write whether or not you got in to the afterlife. This is from the Book of the Dead, by the way, which upper class people were supposed to read to prepare themselves for this life after death. So in any event, all this stuff about kind of order and life and being able to like live your life well, living your best life, right? If you have Ma'at or wisdom, if you kind of see her reflect, but you could never see Ma'at fully. You can't get really that close to Ma'at. She's kind of hidden in the depths of the cosmos. You could see Ma'at if you observed very closely lots of things that were happening in the world and in human life. And wherever you see wisdom, you're seeing a little bit of Ma'at. And you get a lot of it put together over a long period of time. Maybe you could come close to approximating her in your mind. So in the ancient Near East as well, there's Mesopotamia, right? So if we're in Egypt, backwards here in the camera. Okay, Egypt down here, right? Mesopotamia. Here's Israel. Mesopotamia, right, is further west. We have the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Here we have Hammurabi. Over here, and Shamash, the sun god. Remember Shamash, this is the top of Hammurabi's stela, and Shamash is handing Hammurabi his length of cord and his staff. Remember Shamash, you can tell he's a god because he's got like soft serve ice cream on his head, right? Those are horns. Lots of horns means big deity. And he's also got stinky pits, like the smell coming out of his arm, so it's not really a smell. In the ancient world, that's a way to draw light. So it's light emanating from his presence. This is the sun god, or the god of justice. Now, why would the sun god be the god of justice? Probably because like the sun shines and reveals truths about things. Sometimes we talk about kind of like sunshine is the best disinfectant. When people say that, they mean like transparency in government and so on. So in any event, the light bringing things to justice. And here we have Hammurabi receiving the cord and the staff, and he's supposed to make laws with it, right? So the kind of larger principle here, right, in Mesopotamia is that they have a quest for wisdom that looks an awful lot like the Egyptian quest for wisdom too. They don't call the principle of divine truth or justice and order Ma'at. That's the purely Egyptian name. But in Mesopotamia, they have sages, wise people, just like in Egypt, who study in schools, and they're scribes during the day. But they also have this kind of like a search for wisdom and quest for wisdom itself. They have different names for this search for wisdom. They have an ancient scribe named Adapa that they say ascended into heaven and was kind of revealed a lot of these sacred and important truths about the cosmos, and that Adapa is kind of like the patron saint almost. They didn't have patron saints back then, but he's the symbol for wise sages and scribes. This guy, Adapa, would be the symbol of like kind of the quest for wisdom. So they didn't call their principle for wisdom Ma'at. They had two names really, Kitum and Meshurum. Kitum was like kind of the principle of like a justice, and Meshurum was like righteousness. So for them, justice and righteousness were like the principles of wisdom that held together the cosmos. Justice being kind of like big ideas of justice, and righteousness being like, how do I actually inhabit those and live out justice in myself, right? So I can say like we should, justice would be everyone in some way having the ability to live their lives and be supported in their life, and would have access to all the things that someone needs to live. Righteousness would be like, so what do I do? And those big ideas in Mesopotamia, those were the kind of principles, the cosmic principles that were supposed to order the universe. So like I said, this is an ancient Near Eastern phenomenon. In Canaan, too, they had a wisdom literature that they would borrow in many ways from Mesopotamia. So the people who lived before Israel in the land, they had copies of some of these texts, like the Councils of Wisdom was an ancient Akkadian text that there are copies of throughout Canaan. So all to say, these are... Here's our ancient Near Eastern map. All these folks participate in this kind of common discussion of wisdom. They have regional differences, and so does Israel. And if you read some ancient Near Eastern wisdom literature, you'll see it looks a lot like Proverbs. There's some stuff that looks a lot like Job. There's even a book that wasn't called back then, but it is called now the Babylonian Job. So there's plenty of sort of parallels between ancient Israelite books and other ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian books. But all to say, that what we're going to do is read some of this stuff with a careful eye today in order to know something about the differences so that we can understand Israelite literature well. Okay, so a couple things. We mentioned genres when we talked about Psalms and setting in life, right? What's the setting in life for these wisdom and proverbial literatures? The setting in life is kind of mentioned in some of these texts as like a school. So here we have above me a scribe. This is an Egyptian scribe. This guy's sitting here with this text on his lap. So like the scribal school or something is often a place where people would encounter this kind of wisdom literature, copy it, like making copies of these things was really important. And they would kind of wrestle with these big questions and puzzles almost in order to make themselves wiser. So part of wisdom literature was produced to make people wise, to be like a curriculum for wisdom. And this is part of what I think Job is. Job's not supposed to give us all the answers in life. It's supposed to make us think really hard so that we become more wise. I think Proverbs does this too in many ways, etc. And then over here we have an image of the family. And that's another setting in life for this wisdom literature stuff. In the ancient world, ethics was not supposed to be taught to you by kings. Kings didn't really care that much about ethics. Kings were worried about the law and upholding the law, and about military dominance, and also about staying alive, not getting assassinated. And the sort of legal courts, worried about legal issues, and the priests worried about practical issues of getting sacrifices completed according to the plans, according to the principles and so on that they had laid out. And they weren't that necessarily that interested in ethics either. Ethics really, what's good, how do you treat your parents nicely? This is really the world of wisdom literature, or it's the world really of the family. We would call this pedagogical literature, or these manuals that we have from the ancient world. For example, at the end of Proverbs, there's kind of counsels, right, from a mother to a son. And we'll talk about those when I don't want to steal Professor Yoder's thunder, but we'll get to that later. But we had this kind of family settings in literature, in wisdom literature. And in Proverbs 1 through 9, the assumed what's happening in the text is that parents are talking to a kid. So when you read wisdom literature, sometimes you're put in the position of a student, and sometimes you're put in the position of a child with the family, kind of being taught how to live. Both of these might be fictional. That is to say, the Proverbs might not actually be written to kids in a family. This might be kind of a frame story that puts you, the reader, in the position where you're trying to learn. What are places where you'd learn? Even if you're sitting there reading these things at home and you're not in a school or in a scribal training program, but you're also not with your parents, what would make you feel like you have to be ready to learn, and kind of put you in a position of humility, right? Humble submission. That's a big deal for wisdom literature. You can't pretend like you know it all, or that you're the teacher. Even if you're a wise person, if you say you're wise, you're done. You're not wise anymore. You've gone back to the beginning. So. Here, let me move my let me move my screen over here. Okay, so here's some different genres of the wisdom tradition, types of literature, right? We have Proverbs, which we read in the book of Proverbs. We also have riddles that we can come across. So these are kind of games almost. We have instruction sayings. So basically, here's how to do something. Here's how to plant your plants and so on. We have better than sayings. If you read Proverbs, it's better this than that and so on. It's almost like a word game puzzle in a way, trying to get you to think about how you might think something is better, but actually it's worse. It's kind of like an exercise in thought, and then in comparisons, and then dialogues as well. Sometimes you'll have these people dialoguing with one another, like the book of Job. It's a dialogue, right? There's at least part of the book, a big chunk of it, is people having an argument basically about what's right and true and good, and how we should respond to suffering. And then there's other voices. Job says one thing and his friends say another thing. We sometimes even have dialogues between inanimate objects in ancient Eastern wisdom literature, like a dialogue between the wheat and the fruit over which is better. So kind of some of these really interesting conversations that happen. But those are just some of the different types of literature we find. So wisdom isn't a genre. It's a much broader category than that. Some people will call it a discourse. A discourse means lots of different genres, but that are kind of tied together in some sociological way. That is to say, Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes were written basically all, at least I think, by scribes, for scribes, in their pursuit of wisdom that most people couldn't try to attain. I mean, a farmer in the ancient world wouldn't have enough time to sit back and read the book of Job, let alone understand all of the obscure vocabulary with it. So this is stuff written for you all. You all are training to be the scribes of the new generation, and with your fancy graduate degrees. So this is right up your alley.